Hey the guys, over here, and welcome back to my Let's Talk F1 2015 series. Today we're going to be discussing the Canadian Grand Prix. This is part of a year-long series where I myself am doing aerodynamic analysis on the cars during Friday practice and occasionally talking about them on Saturday when we've got races like here at Canada where the qualifying is a bit later than usual. The Friday practice is a bit later than usual, so I'm making this video on a Saturday instead of a Friday. Today, all the images in this video are going to be provided by Sutton Images, so if you want to see them more high detail or just check out the website, then go over to the link in the description. All images provided by Sutton Images. So in terms of the format, the first half of this video I'm going to just be talking about the changes to the cars and some upgrades or just different type of wings and, you know, different body parts to the cars in Friday practice. And in the second half I'm actually going to then talk about the qualifying, which obviously is happening. I'm going to release this video just after qualifying, so I'll get in a little bit of analysis of what happened in qualifying. But first off, we'll just look at the cars on Friday practice and how they went on. So let's just quickly talk through Friday practice before we get into specific team upgrades and what changes they made for Canada. So in free practice 1, both Mercedes after this session said Ferrari looked like they were closer, and with Ferrari spending some tokens for this race, they spent some tokens on the engine development. If you don't know about the engine tokens, then you can go check out on my channel. I actually made an entire video about how the engine tokens work and how the engine upgrading rules work for this season. But essentially, Ferrari spent some tokens. Honda did as well. Honda spent it on reliability. Ferrari on pure horsepower and actual speed of the engine, and there were some rumors flying about that actually got rubbish, that it was quite a lot of power, but it is going to be a little bit. And hopefully here, obviously a power circuit Canada, the next one Austria is also the biggest power circuit of the entire season, so the right time to make the upgrade for Ferrari, I guess. Mercedes didn't make any token spending this race. They apparently changed a few parts for under reliability, so they're allowed to do that without even spending tokens, because if it's to save the engine, if it's to kind of improve the efficiency and the reliability of the engine, then that's fine. But if it's actually improving performance, they have to spend the tokens in the areas they want to. So Mercedes only with a reliability tweak, so no tokens spent there. Grosjean quite close to the Mercedes in FP1, but not really the same in FP2, so maybe just Grosjean was having a bit of a groove in FP1, but also FP1 the track is a bit more green than it is in FP2, so that can sway into things. In terms of other people, Jenson Button had a gearbox failure at the very start. He was stuck in second gear going around, and in general the Williams looked a lot better this weekend. Obviously Canada, a very high speed circuit, Williams known for having a low drag setup, so they are going to go much better here. So here's hoping that they do a lot better, because they have been struggling in recent races. It's been a bit annoying to see, actually, even as not a Williams fan myself. It's just it's weird to see them struggling a bit too much, maybe showing that they don't have maybe the funds that every other team does, because last year they were doing much better at this point. But hopefully it can be a better weekend for them here at Canada. A low drag circuit, same with next race in Austria. Looking on to FP2, rain hit FP2, so not too much running going on. The biggest, obviously, story that you might have heard is that Lewis Hamilton crashed out in FP2. Mercedes basically essentially just sent him out. Lewis Hamilton said afterwards he didn't want to go out, or agreed with him to go out, and then afterwards they all agreed that was probably one of the worst decisions they made. Maybe it's just as bad as the one they made in Monaco. But yeah, so he went out and then simply just completely aquaplaned, and he said it felt like ice going into the hairpin, and essentially just went straight on at the hairpin and crashed straight into the barrier. No huge damage, just the front wing off. He went completely just perpendicular to the wall, so it wasn't really too much of a hefty, awkward angle impact. So now let's look at the actual specific car upgrades or just changes for Canada. In general, every single team would have run a lower downforce setup. Wings and flaps are just elevated a little bit less. The angle of attack is a little bit less, dropped down a little bit, just to make sure that there's not any excess drag on the car. Obviously, there's no way to completely, cut out this excess drag, but the teams try their best to try and cut out the excess drag on the straights while still maintaining overall downforce for those corners. Because here in Canada, it's a high-speed circuit. The corners are quite fast, some fast chicanes there. You do have to have the downforce in those corners, but obviously a very, very long straight down towards that last corner chicane and then the pit straight, so they need to try and cut drag there. But Mercedes just here showing a picture of their front wing detail, some really nice detailing once more. And as I said at the beginning of the video, all the pictures are provided by Sutton Images this time for this video, so some really detailed photographs. Probably one of the best F1 photographers there right now, very experienced photographer, and some really nice detailing on the Mercedes here. You can see just where the kind of you got like 5 flaps curving around like a half circle. That essentially was obviously an upgrade that came in. I think it was China. Yeah, it was at China after Malaysia, where Mercedes felt the need to fast track this upgrade, which it just essentially gets more downforce because the air going through gets channeled. As you can see, it kind of goes right, so the air gets channeled around the right front tire and gets kind of pushed around. So obviously they can try and get it to the rear of the car, which will provide more downforce. But obviously with the Mercedes power unit being quite powerful, all the Mercedes teams really don't need to afford to maybe take too much drag off as maybe some other teams, because they do have that really powerful power unit underneath them. Unlike the Renault teams, of Red Bull and Toro Rosso, they maybe have to cut a little bit more downforce in places because the Renault engine's still not up to scratch. And surprisingly, I didn't mention it, Renault didn't spend anything. They didn't spend any upgrade tokens for this race, which was very surprising indeed. Some people think that's a tactical thing to try and spend them in Austria or spend it elsewhere, or even just maybe just kind of actually just not spend them, have the engine do worse, and for Red Bull to make a statement for F1, because obviously they're kicking off at the moment. They're not happy in the sport. But anyway, getting away from Red Bull, looking at the rear of the Mercedes now, this is towards the rear tyre, and you can just see the metal, and you can just see the slot gaps in the actual floor of the car and these winglets that go towards the tyre. And it's just a way to squirt air towards the tyre wall and make sure the diffuser works a lot better, because you've got a lot of turbulent air with the tyre obviously moving when you're going across the circuit. They want to try and minimize that air getting affected by the diffuser. So they kind of squirt a little like wall of air that kind of seals off this air, kind of keeps it in a nice pocket and kind of vacuums it off from the diffuser, so it works a lot better. Moving on to Ferrari, not too much actual major detailing to show you guys for Ferrari, but just in general, we'll talk a little bit more about their engine development. Obviously, they spent some tokens, so that was for pure power, essentially, so they're hoping to get a little bit more speed on the straights. In general, the Mercedes said the Ferrari pace was a lot more closer than they thought it would be, and that especially Lewis Hamilton said in the interviews after Friday as a whole, he said that they may be a lot closer than we think, and there's still maybe a threat to us this race. And obviously, you've got to remember back to last year, Mercedes obviously had that brake failure, and hopefully they've learned from that, and they've brought sufficient brake cooling, because that was a main thing. The brakes overheated, got overworked, and then eventually failed on both the cars pretty much, apart from Rosberg was able to limp home, and Hamilton had a complete failure. So hopefully they've learned from that. But if there is a slight hiccup, if Mercedes slightly go over themselves again like they did in Monaco, you never know that Ferrari are going to be there to pick up the pieces. Also, maybe the likes of Williams can be there once more, because they're obviously doing quite well in practice so far. And just the last picture from Ferrari, this is actually an upgrade from last race in Monaco. If you just look at where the Santander turning vanes are beneath that front suspension, you can see there's a slot there that wasn't there before, and that was introduced in Monaco. So that eventually just cuts drag. So any air moving through that little slot, instead of being affected by the turning vane, it will go straight through towards the back of the car, move the air a little bit quicker towards the end of the car, instead of being pushed outwards and kind of being affected a little bit more. Moving on to Red Bull, this picture is just going to show us some nice detailing of the underneath turning vanes of the Red Bull. So you can see this is where the bulkhead is. And just you can see those 3 black turning vanes underneath the front suspension. So previously those were 2. Now Red Bull have gone with 3 this time. So a little upgrade there. Obviously underneath of these F1 cars are very important. You never see these detailings too much during the race, obviously, because the cars are moving so fast. But obviously it's underneath the car. But these are very, very important, because any air that goes through the front wing, underneath the nose, that gets passed through the front wing, through the front suspension, it all gets affected by these turning vanes and the suspension. So a very key component, and Red Bull making an upgrade there for 3 different vanes now. So the next development for Red Bull is they've actually gotten rid of their blown wheel nut. So you can see that the wheel nut is completely closed now. There's no hole anymore. So unlike Ferrari and Mclaren, who've stuck with the blown wheel nut for this race, Red Bull have taken it off. So if you don't know what the blown wheel nut is, essentially any air that's coming through that brake duct there on the left-hand side, you can see there's a smaller slot towards more to the brake on the right-hand side. Any air that passes through there, usually they will get channeled through the actual wheel kind of rim itself, and wouldn't actually go to the brakes at all. It wouldn't do any brake cooling. It would simply pass straight through the wheel nut itself, and that air would kind of neaten everything up, because as it exits the tyre, it gets pushed left as the car's moving. Let's say it's moving right, it gets pushed left down to the rear of the car, neatens up all the airflow and makes sure there's like a nice barrier, so no air gets disconnected and it all kind of flows smoother down the side pod. So in general, it just helps the overall downforce to be worked in, because all the air, there's less air getting lost. Quick last few pictures for Red Bull. You can see this is where the slot for the S-duct is, just behind that actual Red Bull, actual bull part of the logo on the front nose. You can see that slot going vertically up. So that is essentially where the air, you've got two on either side. So that's where the S-duct entry is. So if you didn't know that already. And then finally a picture of their rear wing. Obviously looking a lot skinnier. Everyone going for a lot skinnier rear wing. And also the front wing. Some teams have opted to take a few cascades off or even move a few flaps here and there to make the downforce a lot less and make the car a little bit more slippery. Okay, I'm realizing this video is dragging on a little bit, so let's speed things up a little bit, shall we? We're going to move on to McLaren now. So they've moved their little front wing adjustment little mechanism from Monaco. They did this as well, so they just moved the placement, so it's a little bit easier maybe for the engineers. When the pit stop comes in, if Jensen or Alonso ask for a front wing more downforce or less downforce, they can adjust it a lot more quickly. And last thing with McLaren, because obviously the only other upgrade is the reliability upgrade of the engine. They haven't really gone for performance for any sort of aerodynamic upgrades. This last shot is a really lovely shot of the McLaren's S-duct. So obviously Red Bull have one, and this is McLaren's one. So now, instead of like Red Bull's where it's kind of one big piece, McLaren's is sort of a two-way stream of an S-duct. Obviously they've got the same sort of entry as Red Bull, where it's coming off the side of the car. So just a really nice shot of the S-duct there. And once again, images provided by Sutton Images. So very good photographers. So if you don't follow him on Twitter, I believe he is on Twitter, so you can go follow him there. He does some really nice shots. Going to Lotus now, we haven't talked too much about them in this series so far. They haven't really done too much to really talk about. But for this race, they've gone with an oblong kind of, you can see the outlet for the engine cover is oblong. It's a lot bigger on the left-hand side to the right-hand side. Now, apparently, typically it's put on the right-hand side if they do oblong it, because that's where the engine radiator is. But it looks like they've gone for kind of cooling the intercooler instead on the left-hand side. And finally, just a little shot of the Manor Marussia car. This weekend, they did get two new sponsors. So obviously not aerodynamic talk, but just interesting talk nonetheless. Two new sponsors for Marussia Manor. And just looking at this picture, actually, I was actually quite surprised that this was the Manor Marussia front wing, because the last time I saw it, I thought it was a lot less complex. But it looks like they're getting some complexity, if that's a word that I'll use. I'll just roll with it. Yeah, so it looks like the front wing is getting a little bit more complex. Okay, so we talked about the aerodynamic upgrades. Now let's talk a little bit about qualifying. Apologies if that last part of the aerodynamic analysis seemed a little bit rushed, but I did realise how long this video is getting. So now we're going to talk quickly about qualifying, what happened in Q1, Q2, and Q3. Okay, so now let's talk about qualifying. If you didn't know, guys, I recorded the aerodynamic analysis before qualifying, and now it's after qualifying. Q3 has just ended. Lewis Hamilton getting pole position by 0.3 of a second to Nico Rosberg. So not a very close margin like we thought it would be. It was very close in Q1 and Q2, but a lot more pace from Hamilton than in Q3. But the biggest story for Q3, Romain Grosjean and Pastor Maldonado getting 5th and 6th. Great stuff for both of those cars, and it seems like the pace Grosjean first had in pre-practice 1 has come back, and both Lotuses in Q3 and strong in Q3, 5th and 6th. That is awesome to see, and obviously their Mercedes engine helping quite a lot there. That would have been a big factor. Valtteri Bottas does well to get 4th place. Unfortunately, his teammate Felipe Massa was knocked out in Q1 because he was complaining of no power. Seemed like he had some sort of issue with the engine or maybe even the MGU. That was the same exact issue with Vettel though. Vettel had an MGU failure and he was having quite a lot of turbo lag, and he actually got knocked out in Q1 as well. So very surprising, but both of them could have a very good race still, because after Vettel jumped out, there's a little interview with him, and some of the commentators were hinting at maybe Vettel might try a one-stop. Paul di Resta, a pundit for Sky F1 this weekend, just listened to Vettel's interview and thought maybe he might go for it with a one-stop. I don't know. The Ferrari obviously very good on its tyres, but I think it could still be a very good race for Massa and Vettel. They have good pace, especially the Williams is very good at overtaking on some of these high-speed circuits, so it could still be a good race for them. Alonso gets knocked out in Q2. He kept on for Q2, just about on the cutoff area, but then couldn't improve in Q2 and get into Q3. Still not able to get McLaren into Q3, that team. Alonso complaining of just the straight line speed, just a differential about 20 kilometers per hour compared to the top man, which was Grosjean. Grosjean fastest in the speed trap, so very surprising indeed. So the Lotus, very slippery in Canada, working very well with that Mercedes engine they've got today. But Lewis Hamilton grabs pole position, and he's going to set himself up quite well for the race today. His favourite circuit, he said many times. Obviously, Mercedes had their issues last year at Canada, but overall, this has been a very strong track for Lewis so far. So let's see if he can convert it to a pole position. And on that note, that's going to be the end of the video. Let me know your top 10 predictions for the race. Always love to read them. I may not reply to any of them, but I love to read them to see what my subscribers think about the race and what's going to be happening. So comment below your top 10. If you did enjoy the video, then do leave a like. Comment below what you thought. Again, all the images you've seen today provided by Sutton Images, so go check him out on Twitter and his website. Great photographer in F1. If you're new around here, then do subscribe for daily Formula 1 content. I've been Aarava. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and hope you enjoy tomorrow's race on Sunday. Should be a cracker. The Canadian Grand Prix, one of my favourite circuits, always throws up a good race. So I hope you guys enjoy that, and I'll see you guys next time.